Okay, the first thing I'm going to do today is review Monday to try and emphasize the important parts of that lecture and show how the Socratic method kind of leads into the idea of Socratic knowledge. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is next week I'm going to be talking about Plato's theory of knowledge. This week I'm talking about Socrates' theory of knowledge. These are two totally different things. That's one thing you find in philosophy is that you have a word like knowledge that everybody takes for granted outside. Everyone takes this word for granted. We all think we know what it means. In philosophy, you can find two or more radically incompatible definitions of this word. And that's one thing we're going to do. Today I'm going to talk about Socrates' view of knowledge, and then next week I'm going to talk about Plato's view of knowledge, which is radically different. Maybe they kind of fit together, but Plato seems to be talking about a totally different thing. At least on the surface, seems to be talking about a totally different thing. And the reason I bring this up is I will write exam questions and ask students to write about Socrates' theory of knowledge, and they'll put in Plato's. Or I'll ask about Plato's theory of knowledge, and they'll put in Socrates'. And that's wrong. You know, if I'm asking for Plato, I want Plato. If I'm asking for Socrates, I want Socrates. All right, so to recap, in the Socratic method, you have a victim. It's a young man, usually a young man who thinks he knows stuff. Socrates, who listens to the guy, gives the guy an audience. And in this stage of the Socratic dialogue, Socrates is about the best audience a person could have. Socrates is really, really, really interested in what the other person has to say, and Socrates is not putting forward his own views here. Socrates' ideas are just not in the mix here. Which makes it the opposite from most conversations where listening just means waiting for the other person to shut up so I can talk. At least that's the way I do it. And there's an effect on the young man, which he comes to like and trust Socrates. He comes to feel that Socrates really understands him and cares about what he's saying. Have you ever had a conversation where the other person really didn't care what you were saying?
All the time.
Yeah, it's not satisfying. So, now in the next stage, Socrates asks pointed questions. Socrates asks questions that the young man finds hard to answer. Now, it is possible, there's a conversational technique that you can practice on people, just sort of raising random objections as they talk. Whatever they say, you find some way to make it wrong. And that is enormously frustrating. And what Socrates is doing kind of feels like that to the victim. But there's a huge difference. Socrates is operating entirely on logic as he sees it. He's not trying to torture the guy. What he's doing is exploring the logic of the issue. That is, he takes what the guy says seriously. He's not jerking the guy around. Rather, he's really trying to understand what the guy is saying, and he's taking that and exploring all of its logical implications, and then asking the guy, can you deal with this? You say this, and this, and this. Okay, but if that's true, this other thing has to be true. Is that something you really want to be saying? The guy wriggles. The guy doesn't know how to do logic. The guy starts to see that he can't answer these questions, that he's really ignorant. And that leads to the third stage, which is the guy admits ignorance. Now, you've got to notice that Socrates has not won. This isn't a fight. If you've ever had an argument with someone where the other person's aim is just to end up on top, this is not what's going on with Socrates, because when the guy admits ignorance, Socrates says, yeah, you know, I don't know the answer either. I don't know anything. Let's figure it out together. Now, this is why I like the word philosophy as the name of my discipline, because philosophy means love of wisdom. Socrates is like a gardener. He's walking around the agora, seeing pompous idiots and wishing that they were thoughtful people. Maybe he does it just because he likes a good conversation. But you could see him as a sort of gardener. You can have this sort of flower or plant of rational thought, of philosophical thought, of thought where you want to get at the root of things rather than defending some particular belief that you happen to have. So this is, to my mind, this is characteristic of good philosophy, is the understanding that we are all fundamentally ignorant. We are all, none of us have the answers automatically. Answers are hard to get. That doesn't mean there aren't right answers. There's lots of right answers, but they're hard to get to, and there's a lot of thinking that has to be done. Later in the semester, we will deal with a section of the book where the author of the book thinks he knows the answer. He thinks he has the answer. And in my view, he's completely and utterly wrong. He does not understand the terms he's referring to, in my view. Of course, it could be that I'm full of crap. And that's a judgment that you could make as we're going on. Or you could just remember what I say and write it down on the test, take A and get out of the class. That works too. So over here, I want to talk about now, 3 ideas of knowledge. Remember the metaphor of the 3 audiences from Monday. The first audience thought Socrates was ignorant because he was listening to the other guy and the other guy was talking. So obviously the guy who's talking knows stuff. And the guy who's listening is saying, really? I never knew that. Go on, tell me more. Oh wow, you're so smart. That's the ignorant guy. So, at that level, to that audience, knowledge is just having opinions and being willing to run your mouth. But the second audience thinks that Socrates is not ignorant. The second audience thinks that Socrates is knowledgeable because Socrates knows what questions to ask, knows the logical implications. This is the audience that sees Socrates asking questions and the young man going, So, Socrates is the guy who knows stuff because he's the guy who asks the questions and says, well, okay, you're saying that, but that means this, doesn't it? Being able to see the implications of ideas, the implications of claims, see contradictions between claims, and so on. But there's another level of ignorance, and there's a third audience, who's we could call the Socratic audience, and that looks at Socrates and says he really is ignorant. Have you ever had a conversation with someone who really, really knew his stuff? I've had a couple like that I find them very rare. But it's like, you talk to him, you ask a question, he's got an answer. You've got an unclarity, he's got an answer to that too. And the answers make sense. You say it's a political issue, you want to know about U.S. foreign policy in the progressive era, or the Code of Bushido in Japan, or the history of ninja in the film and television. You know, you talk to the person and they know it inside and out. And you can ask any question you like, you can raise any objection you like, and he's got an easy, smooth, comfortable answer. He's not trying to make you think he's smart. He just knows it. And from Socrates' point of view, the important thing is not only does he always have an answer, but that answer can be critically examined. You can go and look at the evidence, you can look at his logic and say, well, okay, that works out. That's good logic. That's good evidence. That's the right evidence to be looking at. You've solved the problem. Now, That's the third audience. Having that definite, well thought out, logically supported understanding. And neither Socrates nor the young man have that, but they're heading towards it. This is the point of calling this philosophy. It's ideally, in its best form, it's engaging in a process that increases wisdom, engaging in a process that leads towards the right answers, and taking all necessary time, taking all necessary effort, doing the work, doing the step-by-step logical work. When we do the wrangles, what we will demonstrate is step by excruciatingly small step reasoning, a little step at a time. The main point of the wrangles is to demonstrate focusing on the logic of an issue. And it's intended to put us into sort of this position where we don't know the answer, but we're trying to work it out. And the wrangles don't go very far. I've never solved an issue in a wrangle. We've never solved an issue. It always leaves it up in the air. But do a few steps of the right kind of work to eventually solve the problem. So, what's the end point of this? What would Socrates think knowledge really is? Again, this is Socratic knowledge I'm going to be talking about here. In a week or so, I'm going to be talking about Platonic knowledge, which is a totally different thing and should not be confused with this. Okay, so what is a really knowledgeable person like? Well, I don't like that. Okay. I'm going to give a crude sketch of something that's kind of like Socratic knowledge, and then I'm going to go on to something that I think really is sort of an example of Socratic knowledge. Say you meet someone who's knowledgeable about Iraq, which I'm not. They know the present facts on the ground, that violence is declining, for instance. Okay, if it is, I believe it is. But you know, you could also ask, why is the violence declining? Why is the violence declining? Well, one reason is as I understand it, and again, I could be totally misinformed, Baghdad used to be almost totally Sunni, but it's surrounded by Shiite neighborhoods. And the Sunni have been cleaned out of Baghdad. Right? That's what a lot of the violence was, ethnic cleansing. Well, the ethnic cleansing has succeeded, and so the violence declines. Gee. Another thing you have to know, Geography. Ethnic history. Which includes racial history. Out of the three groups in Afghanistan, one of them is a different racial group. You have to know political history, which turns out to be related to imperial history. The area that's now Iraq was once part of the Ottoman Empire, was then part of the British Empire, and the British sort of said, hey, you're an independent kingdom now. No, all of you together. No, you're not three separate countries. No, you're not three separate countries, you're one country, and this guy is your king. I don't care if you didn't elect him. We say he's king and he's king. Anyone want to take a guess at how well that worked? Anyway. Why is the Ba'ath Party popular, or why was it popular? Because it was the party of Arab nationalism, which is related to imperial history and colonialism. But wait, there's more. What else goes in? In the early days of Islam, there was a schism between the Sunni and the Shia Ali. And now we have Sunni and Shia killing each other in the name of God, blessed be. Okay. So, what I'm trying to convey here is this crap gets complicated. And it's very hard to say that you know something if you can't answer these kinds of questions. So, but this is just formal knowledge. That was just formal knowledge. That's sort of knowledge in the sense we use it today. Socrates had a different idea, a more developed, richer, deeper, maybe deeper. So, Socratic knowledge let's talk about knowing a virtue. It's like knowing piety, or knowing reason, or knowing spirituality. It's one of my favorites. Knowing faith. Knowing justice. Knowing all the themes of the main Socratic dialogues. What's truth? What's knowledge? What's piety? What's courage? What's courage? Courage actually first. What is friendship? There's one that I think you could spend a lifetime working out. What is friendship? Well, you can know the formal definition of the thing, sure. But that's just the starting point. You ever see a buddy movie, like a cop movie, where there's like two partners who have to get along, who become friends, become enemies, or run into conflict? Okay. Did you guys ever see a movie called Hot Fuzz?
Hot what?
Hot Fuzz. Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, same guys who did Shaun of the Dead. Oh guys, you've got to see this movie. I swear. It's a buddy movie. It's about friendship with explosions and jokes, and lots of shooting. It's basically, you know those American shoot 'em up cop movies?
Yeah.
This is a British shoot 'em up cop movie.
Yeah.
Okay. We don't do that. So, okay, how does friendship relate to being a cop? How does friendship relate to being someone's partner? You know, how does it relate to business? How does it relate to romance? Does it relate to dating? There's all these kinds of issues that go into being a friend. And the more you think about it, the more complicated it gets. Then there's knowing how to live it, knowing what you would have to do. Yes, John?
The one above that, knowing the
Definition. Try to imagine that you have an exercise where your teacher tells you to write down the definition of friendship and then explain absolutely everything about that definition, every little nuance about how friendship works out in real life. Eventually you would find yourself writing a series of novels. This is one of the important things about literature, is that novels can put us in frames of mind, can bring up situations to explain facts about the universe that are extremely difficult to convey without telling some kind of story. So you think about defining friendship. First you could write down, say, a couple of sentences, then it turns into a paragraph. You look at it and say, well, that's not everything. There's a little bit here, a little bit extra. And then you write a little more, and then you have to explain that, and explain that, and explain that. And suddenly it's just, it could be a lifetime study. So knowing how to live it, how to be a friend, is a lot more than just knowing the definition of a friendship. But wait, there's more. For Socrates, knowing something is living it. There's a cartoon that you sometimes see in philosophy departments pinned up on the notice board. And there's two college professors talking to each other. And one of them is saying, well, I teach ethics because basically I will do anything for money. He's teaching right and wrong because he'll do anything for money. From a Socratic perspective, this makes no sense. For Socrates, you cannot teach ethics without being an ethical person, because you can't teach ethics if you don't know it, and if you're not living it, you don't know it. So for Socrates, I forgot what I was going to say. For Socrates, to be just, to know justice, is to be a just person. Right? You don't know things in the abstract and then live differently. To know what faith is, you'll be a person of faith. To know what courage is, you'll be brave. if you really know what friendship is, you will be a good friend. You ever heard that phrase, you know, you don't know what love is?
Yeah.
You know, and that's sometimes, you know, you see a couple arguing, well, you don't see them unless you have surveillance equipment. But when couples argue, one will say to the other, I love you. And the other one says, you don't know what love is. You don't know what love is. You just do what you're told. So, I love the white stripes. You guys are familiar with the white stripes, right? So, actually living it. And, I mean, this makes a certain kind of sense. At least in the love and friendship. You don't know how to be a friend. You don't know what love is. You don't. Now, so, in order to live it, you have to know how to live it, you have to know the definition, you have to know all these relationships, how it relates to everything. So there's all these connections here. So, this says other domain because I can't think of anything else. Say friendship and work. Well, it doesn't really matter what's in here because every time you connect the definition, every time you connect the concept to something else, you end up having to connect that other thing to a bunch of further topics. So you start thinking about here, well, how is that related to this? Okay, but then how are these things? Well, in order to know how this is related to this, I have to know this. You have to know this other domain thoroughly. So if you're talking about love and friendship, how having a love relationship is related to maintaining your friendships, you have to know friendship. But to know friendship, you have to know how that is related to other things. Maybe not as deeply, but then those other things. Have you ever noticed that the categories of academic focus, that the academic departments are arbitrarily organized? We have philosophy, we have geography, we have anthropology, we have sociology, we have psychology. But there's not really neat divisions. When I was doing my dissertation, and before I started my dissertation, when I was in graduate school, I took graduate classes in anthropology, sociology, and political theory, and public choice theory. So those are all, not traditionally part of, neuroscience. I took a neuroscience class too. My girlfriend was showing me her dissertation. She's referring to Aristotle. She's referring to culture. And she did her dissertation in geography. Geography is one of those things that relates to everything. If you're doing geography, you might be studying anthropology and politics and philosophy and public policy. So academic departments, academic areas of study actually bleed into each other, because when you start investigating a concept, my dissertation was in self-esteem. When I started investigating that concept, of course I went straight to psychology. I was still doing a philosophical treatment, but I had to go to psychology, I had to go to sociology, I had to go to neuroscience, I had to go to politics. And in order to understand those, in order to understand those really, really deeply, I would have to see how they're related to other things. So one thing that's sometimes said about Socratic knowledge is the idea that it gives the impression that in order to know anything, you have to know everything, and you have to live it, live everything. I'm not sure I would go that far, because at a certain point, as you come out here, you'll be finding that you run out of things that are relative to this. If you're studying if you're studying love, then you study friendship, and that goes to work relations, and that goes to economics. And then you find, well, this economic stuff is interesting, but it just really isn't changing my understanding of love. So it's there's a sort of a boundary out there. But it's a long way away. Have you ever seen a tree that's pulled out by the roots, maybe by the rain, or it's fallen over and it's pulled its roots out? And see these roots spreading out, all on the ground, spreading out for yards and yards away from the tree. And that's what knowledge is like. You've got a sort of central core, the part that you're most concerned with. But then there's all these roots and tendrils that go out into all the rest of the things. So in order to really understand something, in order to really understand self-esteem, I had to know a whole bunch of other stuff from other domains, all kinds of different domains, going in little angles. And I like the metaphor of the root, because you've got this, it's wiggly, right? You don't know where it's going to go. Roots can go all kinds of different ways and get all tangled and stuff like that. And knowledge is like that. Socratic knowledge is like that. Now, this means that Socratic knowledge is very, very hard to acquire. Probably might explain why Socrates claimed he was ignorant his entire life. Because he never found himself knowing something to be perfectly satisfied that he knew it. He never knew enough to be fully satisfied that he knew this subject. And this is actually something that I see, I occasionally see in very smart students. They're not satisfied with their understanding. They'll hand the paper over and say, well, I'm not sure if I did this right. And Stephen, brilliant. Well, I don't know. There's all this hesitancy, and I don't know. There's all this stuff I don't know. So I think that's characteristic. The consciousness that the stuff you don't know is characteristic of wisdom. So with Socrates, you sort of get the total package. Everything that goes around knowing something. Everything that goes around trying to be wise. You admire and value wisdom in others, wisdom wherever it shows up, and you try to promote it wherever you can. You try to clue people in, even though you know you're not fully clued in yourself. You're always just doing the best you can. You're muddling through. Now, I'm going to leave you with an example, because I actually have a guy. I know a guy over in Santa Ana. The guy's name is Dwight Smith. He runs Isaiah House. How do you spell Isaiah? That was a joke. Isaiah House. Isaiah House is a Catholic worker community. Now, several things strike me about this. Isaiah House is very efficient. They have almost no resources, but all of their resources are put where they will do good, where they will be effective. when I was there, they slept 150 people a night. There are 150 homeless people who didn't have to sleep on the street because of Isaiah House. It's a big house, but it's not huge. It's a moderately large Victorian in an old neighborhood. Still, they're able to give shelter to 150 people. It's a sober living house. If you decide to start drinking or tweaking or doing other kinds of drugs, you're out. They just will not mess with that. They feed people. They provide limited services. They provide clothing. All on a shoestring. Now, the amazing thing to me about Dwight Smith is that, well, I call him the uber Catholic because he took the Christian admonition to serve the poor, that which you do to the least of my creatures, you do to me, took that so deeply to heart that it drives his entire life. He doesn't just say it. He doesn't just understand it. He doesn't just mean it. He lives it. Every instant of his life is part of this commitment to serving the poor. But that's not the best thing. The best thing is that this guy has an absolute blast. I have never met anyone who was having more fun on a day-to-day basis than Dwight Smith. I've never met anyone who was... I've met very few people who were more fun to be with. I've never met anyone who's more fun to be with when there's no alcohol involved. So, he is just fucking crazy. For reasons that I won't bother to explain. I once heard him tell a Catholic worker, one of his volunteers, what to do if some medical facility calls up and says, we're going to discharge someone to you. Catholic Worker House is not a medical facility. If you're a hospital and you've got a patient who can't pay, you can't just throw them out. That's illegal. Once you've accepted them to treat them, payment is a separate issue. So you have to keep treating them. You have to keep them in the facility, which costs money. Now, if you want to save that money, you find a care facility with an acceptable treatment plan, and you discharge the patient to that facility, and you're off the hook financially. So what you're supposed to do is call the registered care facility, ask for a treatment plan, and then discharge them. And a couple of times, Catholic work at the Isaiah House has had people dumped on them. People who were seriously ill and for whom they could not care. People who are bleeding internally. So they don't accept these. But every so often they'll call up and say, we're sending a person over. Well, here's what you do if you're a volunteer at Catholic Worker House and they say, we're going to send someone over. And to explain this, I want to remember that they can only legally discharge people to places that give an acceptable treatment plan. Because if you give them a treatment plan and you follow that treatment plan, and it's a bad treatment plan, they're liable because they knew where they were sending the person. So, you answer the phone. It's some hospital. Say, we're going to discharge someone to you, okay. You say, have you got a pen? Have you got a piece of paper? Okay, now I want you to write down our treatment plan. You ready? Okay, here's the treatment plan. If you send the patient to our facility, we will beat her to death with a baseball bat. You got that? That's the treatment. No, write it down. You have to write down our treatment plan. Now, if you want to send us over here, anything we do that is better than just leaving her to die, It's better than beating her to death with a baseball bat. So it covers you. But if the patient dies, or the patient is seriously ill and sues, and the hospital has to defend itself in court, well, we discharged them to a care facility. And what was the treatment plan? They said they'd beat her to death with a baseball bat. And you sent her over? Yeah. So, I mean, what I love about that story is that, have you ever had a plan? You said, I'm going to do this. And you know, it was really the right thing to do. But someone said, oh no, you can't do that. People don't do that. That's not done. Okay. Dwight never listens to people who say that. He figures out the right thing to do and does it. Right? So you've got this guy who's just, he's so Catholic, it's hard to see the Catholicism. Because he doesn't bother telling you about it, he just does it. So when I think of Christianity, I try to think of people like Dwight Smith rather than certain other people who are rather better known. So is this making sense? Now, I want to take one little step back. A philosophical question. What question is Socrates really answering? Because the epistemological question is sort of like, what is knowledge? But is that the exact question that Socrates is answering here? Or is there a little, you know, subtlety here? Because I'm going to talk about Plato. And Plato seems to be answering the same question. What is knowledge? But he comes up with a radically different answer. And I think the difference is that it'll turn out that Plato's answering a different question. The question I think Socrates is asking actually the question that Socrates is answering is what exactly would a fully knowledgeable person be like? So Socrates is asking, sort of like, what is knowledge empirically? When you find knowledge in a person, what's it like? When you find knowledge in a person, what's it like? How is a knowledgeable person different from an ignorant person? So you can imagine doing a little, this is definitely philosophy. It's a sort of classic philosophy. But isn't it also anthropology? Yeah, it's like, it's a sort of an empirical study of knowledge. Go out, look at a bunch of knowledgeable people. Figure out what they're like. This is sort of something you can do. You can Do this with your friends and neighbors and random strangers on the street. Just talk to them and think, does this person really know what they're talking about? Does this a great place to do this is in church. Well, great in the abstract. In reality, it's probably a crappy thing to do. But in my fantasy world, I can imagine someone going to church, talking to people, seeing the people who really live like Christians, who really take Jesus' admonitions to heart, take the Good Samaritan, the Sermon on the Mount, all that stuff that I don't pay any attention to. And see who really lives it. And who are the hypocrites? Who are the people who are just giving it lip service and going on and doing horrible things to cats, or whatever it is bad Christians do. So as a formal definition of knowledge, as a standard of knowing versus not knowing, I don't like it because it makes at least 99% of humanity ignorant. Almost nobody knows anything to this depth. I certainly don't know anything this deeply. I'm pretty sure I don't live the kind of life that Socrates would consider exemplifying what little I do know. So, by this standard, I'm pig ignorant. That pisses me off. So I want a lower standard for knowledge. I want to be able to say I know something when, I don't know, but something that doesn't require me to do this. You know, I want a realistic standard that isn't so strict. But on the other hand, this is really useful and evocative to me because it's really talking about the characteristics of knowledge. And Socrates is one of the people who took philosophy away from the physical sciences and towards the moral dimensions of life. So what Socrates is really talking about is how should we live our lives? For Socrates, the fundamental question of philosophy is how should we live our lives? Well, we should be honest, intelligent, knowledgeable, brave, form strong attachments, be good friends, be loving, right? Okay, how do you do that? I don't know. We have to think about that. So if you want to be how many books, if you go to the bookstore, how many books are there just on relationships?
None.
Oh, there's tons. There's tons. Not how many, not in the sports section, okay? Or the place where the magazines with the brown paper wrappers. Right. In the other parts of the bookstore, there's tons and tons of stuff about relationships. Right. What is the most immediate, relationships? We live in relationships, and they're complicated. So to be a good boyfriend, to be a good husband, to be a good friend, to be a good parent, to be a good child, some people do it naturally. Some people do good very, just off the top of their heads. Others of us need a lot of help. So you can know abstractly what friendship is. You can understand how that's related to other things. You can have all this knowledge and still not live it. And that's not good enough for Socrates. For Socrates, knowledge is only important in terms of how you live your life, how we relate to each other, how we live our lives, what kind of people we are. Socrates seems to have no use for knowledge simply in the abstract. It's all instrumental for him. It's all about how do I live. Okay, thank you very much for your attention.